Hi everyone. I just wanted to make a quick video on the concept of outside in signaling versus inside out signaling. So we'll put outside in over here, and then we'll talk about inside out signaling second. So this is referring to signaling in the cell. And for outside in signaling, it's kind of the signaling concept that you normally hear about in kind of your biology classes, where if you have a cell, maybe we have a receptor that's present on the surface of the cell. Outside in signaling is when a complementary ligand is going to come in and bind to that receptor. This is our ligand right here. And this leads to some type of change on the inside of the cell downstream. That could be kind of changing in the activity of a pathway, in the transcription of certain proteins. This is just your standard outside in signaling, where a signal comes in from the outside. So the signal is on the outside, and the response is on the inside. All right. So if we scroll over to inside out signaling, let me actually grab my cell right here. All right. So for inside out signaling, it's going to work a little bit differently. In this case, just to kind of continue with this theme, we're going to have our signal on the inside and our response on the outside. So in this case, we received a signal and we've had some change occur in the cell. And let's say that it's some change in transcription. And this is going to alter something on the outside of the cell. Maybe we have a receptor present here that normally is capable of binding to a ligand. But when this transcriptional change occurs, we're going to see that our receptor is no longer capable of binding to this ligand. And we see a change in receptor affinity. For the ligand. Now, this example is really common with integrins, where we'll have an integrin on the outside of the cell. It's going to bind to some type of matrix component. Maybe it's binding to laminin here. There's some type of binding process. Again, this is my integrin. And when this binding occurs, there is some outside in signaling that happens, which leads to some changes within the cell. But then those changes feed back onto the integrin and impact its ability to bind future matrix components. So maybe it feeds back onto the integrin and then it can no longer bind to laminin, right? And this binding is kind of like undone after that signaling has occurred, right? So again, this is where our signal is coming from the inside of the cell. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't upstream a kind of receptor binding that occurred, but this is referring, I guess, to the secondary part of that signaling process, where we return that signal back to the outside of the cell to impact what we're binding to. So just to kind of draw it out in a sequential way, again, with our integrins. to make it super clear, if we have our cell here, we have our integrin on the cell surface. Maybe this is AVB5, one of our integrins. Again, it's going to bind to something like laminin, one of our matrix components. There's binding between those two. And this is going to lead to some intracellular signaling. We'll have increase in RAS, increase in PI3K. I'll talk about this more in my metastasis videos. We have some changes in pathways. We also have some changes in the secretion of molecules, right? So these are changes from an outside signal that lead to an inside change, right? The proteins that we're secreting and the pathways that we're activating. Once that inside change has happened, however, we're going to have an inside change that signals back to an outside change. So this would be like our step 2, where this inside change leads to an outside change, or maybe we cannot bind our integrin to laminin anymore. We're changing receptor affinities. Right, and there's not going to be binding anymore. All right, so hopefully that makes sense for outside in and inside out signaling. They are kind of interconnected. Usually the order would be that you receive an outside signal first, and then those changes on the inside can impact the outside yet again, kind of in like a cyclic manner. All right, that was it for outside in and inside out signaling.